All right, we've got an incredible panel today with a dramatic name, IP or Die. And so you guys all represent IP. I'll represent Die just a little bit, just to play some devil's advocate. So let's get started. My first question for you guys, and answer in kind of whatever order you want, whatever you feel inspired by. You've all started by building these NFT collections that have become IP ecosystems. And my question there is, if I can walk into a Walmart and buy a super cute toy that just looks awesome, or if I can play a really fun game, why does any of this need to be on the blockchain? Why do you need the blockchain to maximize the value of IP?
I think when you look at Web3 brands, the differentiator between a Web3 brand and a Web2 brand, I think ultimately comes down to alignment. This idea that your early believers, your early collectors are aligned in the success of the brand is super fascinating. You know, there's a question I've heard people in the IP business ask for many years, which is, if you could have owned a piece of Mickey Mouse, would you have? Unfortunately, Mickey Mouse was created in the 1900s, but today these new IPs are being conceptualized and inceptualized in this new generation of building IP on blockchains in a way that you can own a piece of the next generation's Mickey Mouse, whether you believe that's Pengu or an Azuki or a Moonbird. That's your prerogative and your belief, and ultimately you have that alignment to go and see that brand succeed and grow. And so I think foundationally, I think blockchain enables digital ownership. You know, digital ownership, could be used in a plethora of different ways. I think actually licensing IP is a huge unlock. This idea that every toy that is on the Walmart shelf is actually an NFT held by a holder, We alchemized it, and every time one of those sells, I get a royalty in perpetuity. And so that's one unlock, but I think foundationally and simply put, the idea that your early believers are financially aligned with the success of your brand, I think is the great unlock of Web3 and blockchain.
So do you think that a brand like K-pop Demon Hunters or Labubus, do you think that they would be better off if they had launched on a blockchain instead of just launching straight into the Web2 world?
I think that one thing you have to look at is there's different paths, right? It's not one is better than the other. What I think is really special about crypto and a lot of the IPs that we work with and have created is their digital nativeness, right? If we think that digital native IP is the future, well, there's actually not that many that are digital native in the way that Moonbirds, Pudgy's, Azuki are, for example. Now, I would say that also K-pop Demon Hunters is also a digitally native brand, but it comes from a different place. It comes from the sort of Netflix world. And where I think we see is there's definitely going to be convergence, right? Of where does an IP come from and where does it end up and to whom is it meaningful? And blockchain will sit at that intersection, but I don't think it's like it must come from one direction or the other. I think what is the hardest thing to do is, can you capture lightning in a bottle? Can you be special, right? And I think certainly K-pop Demon Hunters is special, right? I think we feel, and I feel very strongly like Moonbirds is special. I feel Pudgy is special. I feel Azuki is special. And I think that where you see is different people finding meaning to themselves from not only the experience of what that IP is, but where it came from. And I think that's a really fundamental part that's hard to replicate and hard to quantify, but it's that hard to quantify-ness that makes it so special.
So the origins on-chain are themselves part of the lore?
Yeah, I think if you have examples of successful IPs or IPs that are already in the retail stores, or IPs that are successful, have distribution on Netflix, then it's easy to say like, oh, you don't really need that to be on chain. I think what NFTs and tokenization allows us to do is actually launch new IPs in ways that are more powerful and allow the IP to sit closer with the community and the fans. And so from a net new creation perspective, I think it's totally game changing. And then, ultimately, these IPs have the potential to be a K-pop Demon Hunter one day. So, I think that's where like NFTs can become really impactful.
So Community and fans are a big differentiator. You all mentioned kind of the relationship that people have with the kind of on-chain assets and how that goes with the rest of the IP ecosystem. I'd be curious between now and looking forward and when you started out in this space, how those communities have evolved and what those communities of holders kind of expect. When you buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, you consume that bottle of Coca-Cola and then it's over. You throw it out. When you buy a stock or a DeFi token, maybe you expect to trade it for a higher price. Those are really different models of consumption and community building. Where are your communities on that spectrum? Is it something completely different? Is it changing? What's it going to look like in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's multifaceted. I think uniquely, the beauty about IP versus I think most other verticals within crypto that are hyper financialized is IP actually invades the hearts and minds of people. And I think it creates an interesting dynamic and a unique dynamic specifically for the crypto industry that makes our relationship a lot different. I think speaking anecdotally just on how I see people coming into Pudgy Penguins and coming into the huddle, people come in because they want to be a part of, I think, one of crypto's best communities. I think they come in because they believe that they are their penguin and their penguin is them. They come in because they want to make money. The elephant in the room, I've always addressed that heads on. I think to pretend that doesn't exist, I think is a fallacy. They come in because they want to help shape IP and have input on what the story and the future of this brand could look like. They come in because they believe, this is the next Pokemon and they have an opportunity to have a character within that universe. I think it's multifaceted, but unlike I think traditional products in crypto, I think our relationship is a little bit different with our community than I think most because of that emotional layer. I think we're one of the only categories, if not the only category in crypto that has a deep emotional attachment with the user that's just not hyper financialized.
I think something too here is we should talk not only about the financialization to the holders, but also to the company and what it allows you to do. I think there's a very clear thing happening. Crypto and blockchain are inevitable. I don't think that's a question now. IP is one of the largest topics and products out of Korea, out of many countries. It's how we distribute things. The intersection of blockchain and IP is inevitable. I think that's very strong. Now, how does that look? I don't think we have the answer today. I think we have several different attempts at finding that answer, but what's very clear is the prize is very large. And what's exciting about running a company in that intersection is because the prize is so large for finding and solving that equation, your access to resources, your access to capital, your access to the ability to do major and large activations is very significant. One of the things I think we don't talk about enough is how hard it is to start an IP, how hard it is to grow a company that makes that IP relevant. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a capital-intensive thing to do, and for so long as well, it's been very much in only the hands of people who have done it before, who already come in with lots of resources, right? I think that's one of the most powerful things that we see here is the ability to create an IP, have your 1,000 fans, your 10,000 fans, your 30,000 fans, and see a future that is so exciting and so wrought with potential that you can put together the resources to really not only give it a good and hacky try, but the try that it deserves, right? I think that's kind of what everyone is here to do, is there must be success at the intersection of blockchain and IP. We've seen versions of that success, but this is not the big win. This is not the golden prize for figuring out the equation. It just hasn't happened yet. And that is not a bad thing. That's actually a great thing, because that is the potential that we're all driving towards, is how do you unlock the exact correct way, not only to build a digitally native brand, but to make it something that we've never seen before, make it something that's emergent and more powerful than past activations, which I believe just must happen.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a story in the Azuki community that kind of, wraps up what both of you guys mentioned. The kind of emotional connection that holders have to the IP, and also how it's kind of transformed over time. When Azuki first started, and when a lot of the NFT collections first launched back in 2021, a lot of the activity was around trading. It still is, right? But people joined because they could speculate on NFTs, they can flip them. Over time, though, I think collectors found their identity with these NFTs, And they could actually help grow the brand in different ways. And they form these sub-communities with like-minded people within the community. And so within Azuki, there's a club called the Azuki Watch Club. And it's a small group of people that just love collecting nice watches. And through that club, there was a guy, his name's Andy, and he was like, hey, Z, you guys should collab with this brand called Moser, small independent watch brand. They make a couple thousand watches a year. And if you know watches, like Moser's up there. And so I talked with the owners of Moser, and we ended up doing this collab. So I'm actually wearing a piece here. It's limited to 100 pieces. It's based off of the 4 elements of the Azuki IP. And without the community, without Azuki Watch Club, this collab would have never happened. And as part of this collab, we also introduced this technology called physical back tokens a couple years ago. And the warranty card for this watch has this chip embedded in it. When you scan it, it authenticates that the watch is real, and it verifies that you're the current owner of it. And so it uses blockchain technology to really authenticate luxury goods. And that's something that is a first in the luxury watch space. So, within this story, it's like there's the community aspect of it, there's the technology aspect of it, there's the IP building aspect of it. And I think NFTs has enabled all of that to happen. Without it, you just don't get a story like this in any other kind of brand. And I think that kind of stuff is really powerful, and it's what motivates me to kind of keep doing this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's the kind of completely cold financial asset side of it, where you know that IP is a type of asset. And eventually there's going to be this convergence. And then at the individual level, there's this relationship between a little girl and a Disney princess that has nothing to do with an asset class. And this whole space is this kind of funny smash up of those two different dynamics as it sort of tries to figure out how the blockchain, how Web3 can be a descriptor around that value type that smashes up both this asset class and also this feeling and this relationship. Does that resonate? Yeah, so building on that, I mean, we walk through a doorway coming in saying, it all starts with IP. But when it comes to digital IP, so something other than the watch example that you gave, isn't it a little bit different? Like, I remember when Studio Ghibli, when there was that whole meme across AI platforms, or people using generators to generate, Studio Ghibli this, Studio Ghibli that, and because of the fairly loose protections around it, everyone was able to generate their own images. And I actually found myself, I know we're in Korea talking about a Japanese studio, my bad, but I found myself going back and rewatching Spirited Away as a result of that. Or Taylor Swift might not pursue royalties on everyone that plays her song, but then she sells concert tickets. Do we need IP protection in the traditional way? Are we redefining IP entirely in the age of AI?
Yeah, I actually think blockchain and blockchain native IP, but just the blockchain in general is actually going to solve what I think is a gargantuan problem that's in front of us, which is how are you going to tell what content is real and what content is AI generated? So I think there's a lot of intersections there. I think naturally, in a world where I think the lines are going to be blurred between what's authentic and what's not, I actually think these digital native brands have a huge leg up in terms of their integrity of where things might have started, in a way that I think other brands or Web 2 incumbents today that are not crypto native or digital native are honestly not going to be able to compete with us there. And I think just blockchain solves these problems in a multitude of different ways, and I think that's ultimately going to give us a competitive advantage.
Say more about that, though. The previous brands aren't going to be able to compete in the age of AI, unlike you guys. Why exactly?
I think it's a different type of build. You can even, I'll give you guys an anecdote, but I walked into Warner Music Group just to discuss a potential partnership. On the music side, actually, Pudgy Penguins wants to get into music, believe it or not. And one of the things that we had discussed was just our social media virality. And there's a common consensus amongst a slew of different Web 2 incumbents is that they are not technology first and they're not technology focused. I think what they do best is not where this generation and where this era is going. And so they do long form really well, they do product really well. They don't do social media well, they don't do virality well, they don't do technology well. And I think just the origin story of us being created on chain, right? I think all of us look at our individual projects and ecosystem assets as these first edition collectibles, in a world where you might not know where a Charizard has come from. You know exactly where a Pudgy Penguin has come from, or a Moonbird, or an Azuki. And so I think it's both on the collectible side, the actual origin story of our collectibles, I think are more easily trackable to where they actually came from and how they started and where they're going to go. And then I think on the flip side of it, being a digitally native brand, building in crypto actually conditions you to, I think, build in the cadence that I think this generation is going, which is one that's predicated around speed and cadence and innovation. And innovation and traditional IP are not synonymous, they're antonyms. Traditional IP does not innovate. That's why they keep remaking the same movies with different casts, is because it's just not an innovative industry. And us, by nature of being in crypto, something that's on 24/7, if we don't innovate, our businesses die. And we've seen that time and time again.
I think something that I'd also kind of like to bring up to your question about, how does AI kind of impact this, right? Is I think you have a choice right now as an IP. You can either lean into it or lean away from it. And I view it in the same way as blockchain, in that it's just inevitable. This is a change that's happening. And one of the most interesting things kind of overall is, like, if you look at music, Spotify now pays a de minimis amount. 1 million impressions on Spotify is like hundreds to thousands of dollars, right? This is not how you can make your money. You've mentioned this, Taylor Swift makes money off concert, not off plays, right? And I think what you saw was people who said, okay, in the entertainment world, I know that merchandising, tours, all of these other things that I've built my IP to do, the faster that I've got over that monetizing the song itself is no longer the thing I'm doing, the faster you entered the new meta and were successful. Right? And I think that what we see here is actually the same choice that you have to make, which is, one of the best things about monetizing and activating IP through crypto is how nascent we are and how big that opportunity, as I mentioned, the prize is. For us, we, a few weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, did a sale for a physical randomized collectible item. In 24 hours, we sold $1.7 million of them, $25 at a time. Each unit was $25. We're doing about 500,000 impressions a day on socials, right? It's good, but it's not anywhere near the numbers that many of these much larger creators from the Web 2 space are doing. It's not, right? But we're able to monetize that so much greater because of how this audience works and how this community works and how blockchain works, right? And so what we see here is this opportunity set where even doing these much smaller numbers, there are creators that do literally millions of impressions, millions of song listens a day that make hundreds of thousands. Why are we making 1.7 million in 24 hours? We're doing that because we're harnessing blockchain technology and we're leveraging the opportunity set that's here and is only here today for crypto. Now this will change 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line as this industry becomes more established. But the beauty of the moment right now is that we're at a moment where if you can find the right way to take your IP and intersect it with blockchain, the prize is very large, right? And I think that's the opportunity set that's before us today as digitally native IPs. I think that's also the opportunity set for IPs that are coming from outside of crypto into crypto if they can find that lightning in a bottle that allows them to participate in that type of activation, right? But this is where we see, this is the industry where impressions are the highest value, period, right? It's not the music industry, it's crypto. And so if you take that as your premise and you are an IP and your main output is impressions, more so than it is songs, more so than it is listens, even more so than it is merchandise, I think you'd be foolish to not look at the place in the world where impressions have the highest value, and it's right here.
So you were mentioning Studio Ghibli and that whole trend with the GPT filters. I think why that trend was so viral and why so many of us did it is because the stories that Ghibli created resonated so much with people around the world. And that level of storytelling, you really need soul behind it. And you can only get to that level of storytelling if you really care about your craft. And so I think going forward, there will be IPs that are created using AI very quickly, and you don't really need many parameters around who owns the IP. People just want to create it and share it with the world. But there will always be a place for legendary IP that's created by a combination of both human and AI to create the best stories of the future. And those, I think, do need protection. And I think that's where story comes in, and I can see story playing a big role in this future. And that's what we're trying to do at Azuki as well. Like, we have a good visual aesthetic, but we're really going after crafting a real story that can help scale this IP to millions of people around the world. So you kind of need a combination of both, human craft and AI to do that.
I guess just to push back because of our or die positioning, why not just open source it all? Isn't IP kind of like proprietary technology as opposed to open source technology? And if the real measure of success is impressions, or if the measure of success is people adopting your aesthetic or resonating with your story, wouldn't you get more impressions and more resonance by simply opening it up?
I think to some degree it is, right? Like, I think that's part of what AI is like as you said with the Studio Ghibli example, like, they don't have control over that. There is an active effort to create with the IP, but I think this is where you have to find this very fine line, which is creating for the sake of impressions for your IP is something you love. This is what co-creation with your community really means. And I think AI really enables co-creation with your core community. Now, when we talk about monetization, that's where it's really important to be enforcing a lot of these rights, right? That's where being able, as a central organization, to grow the IP, and if you're a participant in the IP, you want the central organization to grow it as much as possible. There are things that only we can do, the community can't do. There's a level of partnership, right? And that's where IP rights, and that's sort of what I think is most interesting about how Story Protocol is approaching this, and why we've brought Moonbirds IP to Story Protocol, is there's this very fine and subtle thing. We want the community to be creating, using AI, getting impressions, making stuff out there. At the point of monetization, all we're saying is, hey, we want to be cut in on that, right? And why do we want to be cut in on this? Because this is actually good for everyone. Because we as an organization not only need to keep the lights on, but you need to do bigger and bigger and stronger activations that make your derivative work more valuable, right? We're going to be the central org for all the things that need to happen at the highest level, the conversations with the most important key decision makers. But then you as the community can co-create and be a part of that, right? And it's a very delicate balance of relationship. There's such a thing as giving away too much of the value, right? And then you as the parent org have to turn the lights off, and that's not good for everyone. That's not a great way to grow an IP, right? But there's also such a way of being too protective of it, right? There's too much where you say, hey, don't co-create with me. I think that's gone too far. And where is that line in between, I think, is part of the exploration of the moment today, where finding that and executing it correctly, again, has this huge prize.
Yeah, I think for me it's simple. It comes down to you want to incentivize creators to create really good IP, and the way to do that is by giving them the right tools to protect their work. Because if they feel like anyone can just take their work that they share out to the world and then can create their own version of it, essentially making it a derivative, but if they can just go monetize it as their own, then that really creates a bad situation for the original creator.
But do you think that's really possible to prevent with like a guardrail-free AI tool?
Yeah, I think that's what Story, is trying to do, is trying to create a place where you can register your IP so that you can, as a creator, you can allow other people to kind of create the right, or just give them the right parameters so they know exactly what they can do with their IP, what they can't do, and that way it can be more programmatic. And I think it's potentially a best of both worlds scenario. But as a creator, I know that it would really be a disincentive to see my work out there that someone else just took and just started monetizing. Then I would just be more closed off. I wouldn't want to share my stuff with the rest of the world, which is what we don't want.
Yeah, I think my take here is a driving force is the most important variable for the success of these things. And so open source with a driving force is great, and I think it works. But most of the time, when you open source or do CCO, the driving force doesn't become incentivized. In this case, the driving force, the variable of the driving force is the company, it's the entrepreneur, it's the founder. And so as long as you can retain alignment, and if you were to open source, you still remained a driving force, I think it works. But I'm a believer that every bet, every success story in the world starts and stops with the founder and the founding team driving that thing forward. Everyone tries to make it about something else. It's 100% wrong. It starts with the people at the helm. And it's kind of like DAOs, like why didn't DAOs work? Like DAOs in principle should work because there's no driving force. And so I think my only caveat to that is I also agree in the same spirit that impressions above all. But you could argue that there's been a lot of decentralized and CCO style projects who have gotten, and open source their IP, but they don't even get a 1/100th of the impressions that Pudgy Penguins gets in one day. And I would argue that the machine and the driving force is the most important variable, and that variable can, open the, I think we've threaded this line pretty well at Pengu. People can go and do whatever they want with it, and I give them the right to do it, but I don't count on them for anything, right? At the end of the day, I know it's my responsibility and our team's responsibility to drive this thing forward. And so I think in principle, you should let your community co-create. You should give them the right to monetize their IP. You should give them the right to, participate in the ecosystem deeply and to co-create this environment alongside you, but you can't depend on them, I think, is the key variable. And those lines always get blurred. Usually when people, talk about decentralization and community, they commingle that with, hey, you have a responsibility to build this thing on our behalf, when I think that responsibility is solely on the team and the project founders.
And I think even doing that is already a big step compared to traditional IPs, because we work with a lot of anime partners that work on a lot of the iconic IPs, and they're so strict with their IP that they don't even like commission artists or cosplayers, all these fans that actually help proliferate their IP. They actually don't like it because they translate the IP in ways that they just feel like is not original. And I think for our teams here, we encourage the community to co-create, and we'll retweet, we'll help amplify. Even doing that is like a huge step compared to how I see things work in the traditional world.
One thing I've always heard about in our space from the beginning is that one of our goals is to help creators get compensated fairly for their work. And that there are these big machines, these middlemen that prevent the people with the actual creative idea from making the money. Meanwhile, kind of what I've seen in the space, like everything else, is people that are set on making money, make money, and people that are set on creating things, create things. And sometimes if one cares about the other, they manage to do both. But it's been basically more of the same, right? Do you think that our space is changing the dynamics for creators and IP getting more directly remunerated and cutting something else out? Or do you think it's just transposing or transporting the old system onto a blockchain?
I think there's a slew of core differences. I do think today's audience isn't as appreciative for creators as I would like them to see. I've been a big champion of this for a long time, but I've always thought one of the beauties of Web3 and crypto, specifically for creators, was the CPM, the cost per 1,000 impressions that a creator got in Web3 was so much more significant than any Web2 incumbent, that Web3 was going to win solely off of the backs that creators made more money here than they did anywhere else. And I believe this because if you look at the biggest businesses in the world, or at least half of them are social networks or built around social networks, and social networks are built around creators. Creators are the custodians of culture, they're the custodians of attention, and they're the custodians of their audience, and they bring them places. Web3 at one point really embodied this ethos. I think slowly the incremental trader, I think, has taken dominance over that fact. And I do think it's a balance. I do think that there was in a moment in which I think the creator incentives were too egregious. Now I think they're too little. That's obviously depending on what you're referencing, and I know there's a lot of beautiful different ways to monetize from a creator perspective that are coming out here shortly, really speaking through the lens of NFTs. But I think it's power law, and it ultimately will work itself out. I think the pendulum will swing. I think right now it's so swung to the right, which I think is why you're kind of seeing a little stagnation in terms of we are kind of the Web3 incumbents at this point. You're not seeing any net new guys come, and I think that is the reason, because the monetization structure is slightly broken. But again, this is, there's protocols fixing this. We're speaking at a summit where the protocol is working to fix this problem. And there's a bunch of other people working to fix this problem. But it is something that I will just speak candidly and I've been passionate about for a long time, which is the creator is the custodian of momentum, of volume, of inflows and outflows or lack thereof. And I do think that, as we speak today, the creator monetization is just slightly broken in Web3, but I think we'll get back to a fair medium.
So I think it really depends on how you define creator. If you define it in more of the traditional Web2 world, like an artist, for example, I think with Azuki, we found ways to help creators monetize through, as a byproduct of the IP and the brand and the community being built out. There's been over $1 million paid to commission artists on just the Azuki IP alone. And there's artists in Southeast Asia that have made it their career to do commission art for Azuki PFPs, which is pretty amazing. But I think when it comes to crypto and I think creators, I actually think of what is a unique product that's enabled with crypto? And I think it's creating markets and capital formation. And so creators in the Web3 sense is more like people that launch tokens or create markets. And in that sense, I feel like crypto has been really good for a lot of creators. And this whole creator capital markets thing is happening, in the space right now. A lot of it is short-lived, but there's always another way to launch new markets in crypto. And there's always the early adopters that do quite well there. Is that sustainable? I think ideally there's ways to incentivize more longer-term creators in the space, and I agree. We're still figuring that out as a space.
I think something that you see is what is a creator has changed dramatically over the last even year, let's say. Historically, when you think creator, I think in the IP space, you think someone sitting at a desk with a pencil in their hand drawing, and that is certainly a creator, but today there are many, many, many more versions of what the creator is, right? You have the creative, but not all creatives are the main creator, and not all creators need to be creatives. And I think that's really important. That's part of what we're seeing evolve overall, but the beauty of crypto is it evolves the fastest here because we are, as a community, always thinking about disruption and adoption, and there is less structure to fight against, right? And where I think we see creators really winning today is people who create systems, influence, impressions, right? I would even say to a certain degree, the creation of Story Protocol itself is a creative moment, right? And I don't think we should discount that element of it. We see even with AI, right? People who would never consider themselves artists creating creative elements, right? And that element not only, it started mostly, first it's text, then it's been visual, but we're even seeing now with some of the protocols on Story, AI games entirely, right? Are you a creative if you're making an AI coded game? You're a creator for sure. I don't know if traditionally you would be considered creative, but you're at least a creator, right? And where I think that we see the democratization and the access really beginning to spread is as we widen that definition of creator, right? There are many people in our ecosystem building on top of the Moonbirds IP, and what we want for them is, one of the things that we created was just turnarounds of all our figures. We've created assets that are specifically directed, upload this into your AI as you're prompting, and this will help it give a better output in our brand context, right? Because I actually think that one of the biggest unlocks happening right now in or out of crypto is the ability for a non-creative person to become a creator and to bring an idea to life. And it's the law of big numbers. The more people creating, overall, the better the best creation will be. And so I think we're at the precipice of something that's immense. The number of people who can pick up a pencil and draw must be smaller than the total number of people, right? And so everyone who couldn't pick up a pencil and draw was not in the old paradigm of creator. Today, they are, and I think we'll see that continue to be the shift over the next 2 to 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 years is what is a creator and what is creation has really fundamentally changed. And I think the faster we expand our view of what it is and bring blockchain into the mix, not only the faster we can rise to the top of that equation, but suddenly today it's very open field. 5, 10 years from now, I think we will see a lot more established structures, et cetera. This is health and maturity of industries. This is just kind of how this happens, right? This is, as you talked about, a lot of the barriers in traditional industry. And the exciting thing about the moment today is that those barriers, those structures don't exist. If you are an excellent creator, it is efficiently selected. I think Luca said, I believe in the efficient outcome, and I too believe in the efficient outcome. And the green field that's been opened is just so incredibly substantial.
Well, in our last few seconds, I want to just, since we have these incredible luminaries in this space on stage, what's your most surprising high conviction idea for what's going to happen in the near future of IP? Is it going to be, Azuki develops AGI? Is it going to be an ETF for Pudgies? Super lightning round. What's the wildest thing that you think is going to happen that you have high conviction in?
I do think an ETF for penguins would be great. But I'll give you a non-biased perspective and a non-biased answer. Prediction markets are the new form of content.
Awesome.
If I could get to, I think for us, we're focused on one very specific thing right now in the company. Burb and Burbish is a new part of our brand, and what we really care about is people saying they're Burbish. So that's excited about the burbs, but when in general speech do you say the word Burbish is something I think a lot about. If we've entered people's daily speech, that is a type of creation that is so mimetic and ingrained and valuable. That is really our focus. It's not just IP as image, it's not IP as video, it's not just IP as game, it's IP as language. Zagabond,
take us home. High conviction idea.
We'll have Azuki general intelligence in a week. No, I think we're working on the Azuki trading card game, which I'm very excited about. And I think it's a trading card game that originates from Web3 IP, and I think it'll be a top 5 trading card game in the world in 1 year's time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.